What's going on, everyone? GoodMicWork commentaries back at you with the very elusive classic retro pay-per-view review. I've been telling you guys in recent videos that I plan on bringing this segment back a lot more frequently on the channel, and here we are. With what I hope to be many, many more of these. This is primarily why I have moved my podcast into the live format, the new Winged Eagle podcast that I'm doing every Saturday on the YouTube channel. Part of the reason why I changed that format up is to allow myself more time to edit videos like this, because this is really, really what I enjoy doing. And I hope to have many more of these in the future. So if you have suggestions for future pay-per-views to do, hit them with me in the comments below, over on Twitter, on Facebook, on Patreon, wherever you want. And I'll try to do as many of these as possible. I've got a couple of Survivor Series reviews already planned for the month of November as well, and I'm sure I'll do some fun stuff in December and January for the Rumble. As far as this episode goes, we are going to discuss, because it's the month of October and Halloween is on the horizon, we're going to review WCW Halloween Havoc 1998. I told you guys on social media, as a matter of fact, I think it was Twitter, that I informed you guys that I planned on doing a Halloween Havoc review in the month of October, and I wanted all of you to select which one I was going to do. So I put up a Twitter poll with the thick, or the middle of the 90s, like 95, 96, 97, and 98, and 1998 won by an overwhelming margin. A lot of people wanted me to talk about this one. I have personal memories of it. I purchased this pay-per-view in 1998, which is something that I didn't regularly do. I only bought all of the WWE pay-per-views every month, and I would only purchase WCW pay-per-views if I was interested in them. And I don't know what I was thinking here. I did not really have the money to be spending like this back in these days, but I did it anyway, and I'll fill you in on all my memories of that as well. Because this is a podcast episode, you will be able to download the audio of this if you would like on my website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com, so head over there if you would like to do that. You can also find me on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify. And if you choose to watch this video on YouTube, there will be enough rotating pictures and shit like that to keep you interested and keep your eyeballs on the screen. But before I bore you completely to death, let's jump into this pay-per-view. Like I said, WCW Halloween Havoc 1998 took place on October 25th, 1998 from the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, I believe that several Halloween Havocs in a row took place in Vegas. They kind of had this thing, kind of like how SummerSlam was in LA, and I think they did Halloween Havoc there a few years in a row. And holy shit, one of my favorite things about this pay-per-view when I started watching it back on the network was this set. Look at this thing. Is that not the most beautiful professional wrestling set you've ever seen? This is why I miss these days. WCW, they were the punchline of a lot of jokes, especially around this time, late 98, 99. There was a whole bunch of shit they did wrong, but there were a few things they did right. And when they did them right, they did them extremely right. This is one of the best pay-per-view sets in history. And when we see what has become of WWE in recent years, although there's been some talk of potentially having some more exclusive sets in the future, we haven't seen this type of thing in many, many years. And this was one of the best, by far, Halloween Havoc. And I even did a WWE pay-per-view revamp schedule video a few months ago, where we kind of took the pay-per-view schedule and reworked it for the better, basically like fantasy booking. And I included Halloween Havoc in my WWE pay-per-view lineup. I narrowed it down to 10 pay-per-views a year from 12, and got rid of a few pay-per-views and added a couple throwbacks to WCW, and Halloween Havoc was one of them, because I have a ton of memories of a lot of Halloween Havoc shows. I've got them all on VHS. Here's 1998 right here. Unfortunately, I did not watch this tape while I was making my notes for my review, because I just recently disconnected a VCR that I still have hooked up. And I went to go look for the raw footage, because I always recorded every pay-per-view I purchased, WWE, WCW, whatever. And for some reason, Halloween Havoc 1998 is missing. So not only did I not watch the VHS, I couldn't find my original recording of the show either. So I had to rely on the WWE network, and we will talk about that in a minute. Some of those music edits make WCW pay-per-views on the network virtually unwatchable. But we had Bobby Heenan, Tony Schiavone, and Mike Tenay on commentary for this. And Bobby Heenan was hilarious in this right off the bat here as they're going through the intro and welcoming the audience. Heenan is talking about Hulk Hogan, and he botches one of his lines. Hulk Hogan had recently attacked his own nephew Horace on the previous week's Nitro, and Bobby Heenan, instead of calling Horace Hulk Hogan's brother's son or just Hulk Hogan's nephew, he called Horace Hulk Hogan's brother's nephew, dead brother's nephew, is what he said. And then as soon as he's done delivering that line, he immediately just takes his headset off and puts on this like golden Halloween mask, and then puts his headset back on and just starts staring at Tony Schiavone and Mike Tenay, who try their best to no-sell it. And when Schiavone turns around and sees the mask on Heenan, he actually pulls it forward and snaps it back in his face. So I was only, 3 minutes into this pay-per-view, and Bobby Heenan already had me on the floor laughing. Goddamn, I miss that man. The show actually opened with a promo following a Nitro Girls performance. Mean Gene is in the aisleway there, right in front of that beautiful set, and he's going to interview Rick Steiner. And this is where the biggest clusterfuck in the history of wrestling begins. This is so incredibly hard to follow. As a matter of fact, when I was making my notes for the show, I remember most of it from back in the day, but this was 21 years ago, so I needed to kind of refresh my memory and watch this pay-per-view straight through. And as I'm making my notes, I'm almost getting frustrated about how all over the place this situation with Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, and Buff, and the Giant, and everything, it all starts right here. Mean Gene's interviewing Rick, and he's talking about his match later that is advertised and is supposed to be a brother versus brother match. Rick Steiner versus Scott Steiner. Now try to follow along here because this shit is just a mess. So he's out there talking about the match. He's joined by Buff Bagwell, who's kind of recently been on the outs with the NWO. He comes out and he claims to be completely done with the NWO. He asks to be in Rick Steiner's corner. Rick is skeptical, but Buff Bagwell somehow convinces him. So they go through this whole thing for Buff Bagwell to come out there and convince Rick that he's a babyface now and he's going to be in his corner and he's going to have his back against Scott Steiner because he's going to have the black and white in tow. So for some reason, Rick is like, okay, they shake hands and they go away. So that match is set for later on. We get our first match of the night, Chris Jericho versus Raven. Now, this one was fun. Now, this was announced last minute. And when I talked about earlier in the intro there about these frustrating and horrific WCW music edits, I understand that WWE kind of probably has to do that. Some of the edits probably is due to cost cutting and, not wanting to, pay royalties and shit like that. And others, there might be other reasons. But it really drives me crazy watching these WCW pay-per-views, and ECW pay-per-views too on the network are impossible. Luckily for me, I have most of these pay-per-views in my collection with the real music in there, but for some reason, like I said, I couldn't find 1998. But it really drove me nuts because I liked Chris Jericho and Raven's music in WCW, but instead, both wrestlers on the network version came out to their WWE themes. Chris Jericho came out to break the walls, and Raven came out to his Raven music in WWE. But what was interesting about their WCW themes that was so cool is they were kind of like knockoffs. DDP had a Smells Like Teen Spirit Nirvana knockoff. Raven had a Come As You Are, also from Nirvana, and Chris Jericho had a Pearl Jam knockoff, Even Flow, which is ironic because Raven's finisher in WCW was called the Even Flow. See how that all ties in? Very cool. But I think because of these knockoff themes, WWE doesn't use them, but it drives me crazy because it just fucking ruins the experience. You know what I mean? But anyway, Raven is pissed. He's sitting in the corner like he typically did, and he got on the mic and said, there's a conspiracy against him. The flock had recently disbanded, and he's kind of, by himself now, and he says because that he's being forced to compete with no notice like this, there's a big conspiracy against him, and he's not going to do it, and he walks away. Jericho then gets on the mic and calls him a chicken shit and calls him a loser and basically goads him back into the ring. Raven charges the ring, and now we're underway, and this is a pretty decent little opening match here. These guys are two of my favorites. I was big Chris Jericho and Raven fans around this time. I started liking Raven maybe a little bit less after he left ECW because I loved that character in ECW. It was one of my favorites of the 1990s. And I still liked him a lot in his WCW and WWE runs, but, the Raven character wasn't quite what it was in ECW. And he was kind of all over the place in WCW as well, although he did hold a couple of titles, the US title and things like that. So it's not like he had nothing to do there, but I just thought the magic was kind of gone, I guess, after he left ECW. And Jericho was kind of just starting to get rolling with that heel character. He had been that white meat, bland, horrific babyface when he first came in, and now he's starting to be, a little bit of a shit talker, and he's got an attitude now, and he's a fun heel. And the two of them had a really good match after a couple of decent little sequences between the two, including Jericho kicking out of the even flow and a low blow right in plain sight of the referee. Jericho winds up tapping out Raven in the Lion Tamer despite Canyon's interference, who jumped up on the apron, and Raven threw Jericho right into him. And it was a good, fun match, a solid opener, and a great way to start this pay-per-view. And I absolutely loved the little hops that Jericho used to do. I'll put it up on the screen here for you. Remember that when he would kind of jump like that? Oh my God. Hysterical. Love that stuff. Great match. And just when you see where they went in their careers, especially Chris Jericho, who's still relevant and a world champion to this day as of the recording of this commentary in 2019, pretty incredible that this was 21 years ago. We're back to the Halloween Havoc set again for another promo, this time from Hollywood Hulk Hogan, who's out there with Eric Bischoff, and they recap what Hogan did to Horace on Nitro, splitting his wig with just a gnar chair shot, and they would show later on the staples in Horace's head. And Hogan basically just vows to beat the Warrior. Nothing else really too exciting coming out of the promo. Just your typical Hollywood Hulk Hogan promo from that time period where he's just really loud and, to be quite honest, really good. Next match was one of a few matches that could have just been on Nitro. Part of the problem with this pay-per-view, which we'll talk about later on in the main event and that whole debacle, I think one of the pay-per-view's biggest problems is it just had too many throwaway matches. This is one of them. Now, I'm a big Brian Clark fan and a huge Ming fan, but to put this match on a pay-per-view, I didn't even see the point. It was filler. That's all it was. It went about 5 minutes. Wrath got the victory. They were kind of pushing him around this time. I don't remember if this was when his winning streak was still going on, because I remember he strung up a really impressive string of victories as well, and I think Kevin Nash beat him on Nash's road to face Goldberg at the end of the year where he would win the title. But I can't remember if that happened before or after this, but in the end, Wrath got the victory in just a really big, pounding, big man fight. Didn't look very good, but you know what? That's okay. Next match up was Disco Inferno versus Juventud Guerrera. The winner of this is going to face Billy Kidman for the Cruiserweight title later on in the night. So the winner of this is going to have to do double duty. My memories of Disco, I just was laughing so hard when he was coming out because he had that music and he was a pretty entertaining character. I think he'd do really well in a company like AEW right now when you see other guys like, Orange Cassidy and some other kind of goofy ass gimmicks. I think Disco would fit right in. But my memories of Disco too, I remember back in 1997 in WWE, and for those of you fans who were watching back in those times or remember it, I'm wondering your thoughts on this as well. Do you remember of there being rumors of the Disco Inferno coming in to be Honky Tonk Man's protege? Because in early 97, Honky Tonk Man was playing up the fact that he's looking for a protege, and at the time, it looked like he was going in the direction of Triple H, of Hunter Hearst Helmsley, which I think would have just been a really odd pairing, and I'm glad that they didn't do that. In the end, it would wind up being Rockabilly, who would debut it In Your House, but I remember the dirt sheets and some of the hotlines around that time were speculating that Disco Inferno's contract was up and he was heading over to WWE to be Honky Tonk Man's protege, and I would have actually liked to see that. And I think if Disco grew some sideburns and you put him in one of those Honky Tonk Man jumpsuits, he might be a pretty decent Elvis type wrestler. I don't know. But in another universe that happened. But whenever I see Disco, I am always reminded of those dirt sheet rumors. This match was surprisingly good. When I went into it, I wasn't sure. I like Hoovy. Hoovy's a hell of a wrestler and everything, but I just wasn't sure if this was really going to be that great. And it was. Very good match. They were kind of all over the place. It didn't go very long, but that's to be expected if one of them is going to have to face Kidman later on. Disco hits like a jumping pile driver for the win and gets the opportunity to face Kidman later. Kidman would do a backstage, I think, interview or something like that with Lee Marshall, hyping up this match as well. We are now back to the clusterfuck. At last we left them, Rick Steiner and Buff Bagwell were now all of a sudden buddies, and Buff Bagwell is going to be in Rick's corner when he faces Scott Steiner later on. So we're back on the stage now for yet another promo. It's like match promo, and Steiner is out there this time, and my God, his promo is just batshit nuts. I mean, does this guy ever cut a promo that is not batshit nuts? And everything is so fucking sexual. You know, I mean, I remember these times in the Attitude Era. That's what people did, and that's the way they talked. But goddamn, does this guy take it to an absolute ridiculous level. He brings out the Giant. The Giant joins Scott Steiner out there, and here it starts getting real weird. Like I said, make sure you're writing this down and scoring at home because you're going to get lost. The Giant is actually tag team champions at the time with Scott Hall, but Scott Hall has got a match later on with Kevin Nash. So during the promo, they basically say that the two of them are going to team up and defend the tag team titles against Rick Steiner and Buff Bagwell. After all this shit talking, this is where they land. Now, first of all, Scott Steiner is not even tag team champion, so how is he going to defend the belt? Second of all, this was originally a brother versus brother match. Now it's going to be a tag team match. Why? Because the Giant says so? Well, J.J. Dillon comes out, and he's the authority figure, and he actually says, okay. And to make matters even weirder, once J.J. Dillon agrees to this ridiculous request to have Scott Steiner be a tag team champion for one night, filling in for Scott Hall to defend the titles against two people that they weren't even booked in at first. It was supposed to be Rick and Scott, and then JJ is okay with this, and in the dumbest part of the entire segment, he throws in a little stipulation and says, okay, you're going to defend the tag team titles, fine, but if Rick Steiner and Buff Bagwell win, then Scott, you have to face your brother for 15 minutes. Like, that's some big punishment. I mean, if JJ really wanted to stick it to Scott, he would just say the match is remaining as advertised, brother versus fucking brother. So instead, he agrees to this ridiculous request and then says if they lose, then Scott gets in the ring with Rick for 15 minutes. Forget the 5 minutes. That's normally the case when it's a manager involved or something. So then they're going to have another 15-minute match after that if they win. That's just crazy. So I just don't understand why they did that and why they went in that direction. And don't worry, it would get even weirder later on when we got to that match. Next up, we had Alex Wright versus Finlay. This was one of those should have been on Nitro matches. They could have just stricken this match from the pay-per-view and they wouldn't have had the issues that they had later on. It wasn't a very good match, not one that I even paid much attention to. It was okay. I mean, Finlay and back in the day, Alex Wright was not horrible. And Finlay, we all know what he can do. But in the end, Alex Wright got the win after a neck breaker, and that's really all I have to say about that match. We then get a match between Saturn and Lodi, two former Flock cohorts. Now, Lodi is actually from the town that I used to live in North Carolina, Greenville, North Carolina. He still, I think, lives around that area and does some indie shows and all that. I have never personally met Lodi, but I know a ton of people who know him, and it was always kind of crazy seeing him on Nitro every week with the signs and all of that. Saturn is kind of sporting some new gear here. I think they're trying to find identities for all of these former Flock members like Lodi and Saturn and Kidman, but in the end, who gives a shit? You know, this was not a match that I had any interest in. I never really cared about what these guys were doing back in the day anyway, and I cared even less about it now. Saturn won pretty convincingly. I mean, Lodi was, you know, glorified jobber pretty much in WCW. He wasn't going out there and winning a ton of matches. Saturn beats him pretty damn hard and convincingly and eventually hits a Death Valley driver for the win, and that's really all I have to say about that. We get the Cruiserweight title match up next. Billy Kidman taking on Disco Inferno. Disco heads out there for the second time. This was an okay match, but not great. I think I like the Disco and Hoovy match a lot better. I really like Kidman, though, at this time. I thought he was a great worker. The Cruiserweight belt looked good on him, and he was entertaining, and he was kind of different. You weren't seeing a whole lot of guys throwing the shooting star presses. There was only, I could probably count on one hand, guys who were doing it in the business. Now everybody can do it. Now everybody can do it from the ring mat. They don't even have to climb to the ropes anymore. So it's pretty amazing how the athleticism in wrestling has really evolved over the years. But, you know, decent match with a couple of cool spots. I really liked Disco Inferno with a really cool counter to a top rope bulldog. He kind of like twisted out of it. It just looked really good. Billy Kidman even kicks out of the pile driver, the same pile driver that beat Hoovy, and counters a couple of powerbomb attempts before hitting the shooting star press for the win. So Kidman retains there, and I remember at the time being happy with that. I thought Disco was entertaining and everything, but I much preferred Billy Kidman. Now back to the ultra clusterfuck. The tag team title match is up next. Okay, where do we start? This is a fucking mess here. You're not going to believe this shit. Anyway, first of all, I have to comment on the Giant coming out smoking. I always hated this. He did it for a really short time in WCW, and it just did not look right. First of all, he's gigantic. He's fucking Bigfoot. So he's got this tiny little cigarette in his hand, and you can barely see it. And I don't know if he's trying to be cool like Hall and Nash. It felt like to me he was trying to be cool like them and failing miserably at it. Plus, he just looks so stupid in his trunks. You know, when Scott Hall or Kevin Nash, they would come out like drinking the little solo cups, you know, or having something in their hand or whatever. But they just looked a little different because they just had a T-shirt on and, you know, they just didn't look as goofy as Big Show, I suppose, or the Giant. He just did not look right. Not a good look for him. He was already on his way out of the company. I remember during this time, the dirt sheets and the hotlines were already speculating on his departure and heading to WWE. And this was October, and by the time we would get to February, he would be debuting at St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So I think they were already kind of starting to, you know, get him out the door, and he would job a lot on his way out. And I know Bill Goldberg would beat him right at the end in a match. So I guess, you know, what he was doing here wasn't that eventful. He was one half of the tag team champions with Scott Hall, but Scott Steiner is taking his place. I guess they feel it's the same first name, so whatevs, right? As soon as the match gets underway, you got everybody in the ring. Rick and Buff are out there, and Scott and Show, and basically as soon as the bell rings, Buff immediately turns. So he just turns on Rick Steiner right away, which the announcers and everybody were skeptical to begin with, but somehow he convinces idiot Rick Steiner to let him be in his corner and then ultimately his tag team partner, and then he gets turned on, and Buff leaves, leaving Rick Steiner in a 2-on-1, basically handicap match. So it's for the tag team titles, it's 2 against 1, and to make matters even crazier, guess what? Rick Steiner wins. He wins the tag team titles by himself. Technically, I suppose Buff Bagwell is supposed to be one half of the tag team champions as well, but they don't really make it seem that way. They give Rick both belts by himself. And remember, there's a stipulation in the match that if he wins, he gets 15 minutes with his brother. So we already had this really long match, and now we have to turn around for 15 more minutes of Rick and Scott, the match that was originally fucking booked to begin with. You know, when you look at what happened to them in the main event, you wonder how any of this was allowed to happen. There were so many things they could have done to shave time off, and this segment and this whole fucking mess from start to finish, the multiple segments that it took up and the very long 2 matches was so ridiculous. It was almost frustrating watching all this. But don't worry, we're not done. Because in the middle of the Rick and Scott Steiner match, we get a guy jumping the barricade, wearing a suit and a Bill Clinton mask, like a rubber mask on his face, gets in the ring, and pulls off the mask to reveal that it's Buff fucking Bagwell. What the hell is going on? So Buff Bagwell convinces Rick Steiner to let him be in his corner, then let him be his partner, then immediately turn on him. But instead of like hanging around at ringside to help the NWO, he leaves just to put on a new pair of clothes and a disguise and come back in the ring and attack him again. This is so crazy. And you know what's scary? We were still a year away from Russo getting there. This was done without Russo. I mean, this is so fucking all over the place. I was literally getting mad because I'm like, how hard is it to write notes for a pay-per-view review? They are confusing the shit out of me. There's just way too much going on here. So he pulls off the mask and attacks Rick Steiner. But guess what? Rick Steiner fights him off, fights off Buff Bagwell, and winds up beating his brother anyway. What a mess. So Rick Steiner was the fucking man at Halloween Havoc. You know, he was in the opening segment, and then he wins both of his matches, including winning the tag team titles by himself, and then beating his brother right after that. And all of this elaborate plan to turn on him by Buff Bagwell was all for nothing, and Buff looks like a fucking moron coming out of it. So I am really glad that is over because it was annoying as hell. The final 4 matches of this card, when you look at them on paper, were so incredibly strong. These could have supported any Starrcade or any WrestleMania when you look at them on paper. But my God, with the exception of the main event, they all fell so flat. Specifically, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. This match was up next. And to me, when I look at this, it was just sad. There was so much going on with this storyline that I didn't like, especially the Scott Hall alcoholism storyline. They were taking Scott's real life issues and turning them into a storyline, which is something that they did on WWE's side as well. We saw the same thing with Hawk, which was extremely disturbing and fucked up when you look back on it. And WCW here is doing the same thing. But to me, when you look at 2 years prior, or almost 2.5 years by this point, when the Outsiders came in, how huge that was for wrestling, how that shifted the balance, how that turned the tables and really changed the business completely from top to bottom when they came in. You would think that an inevitable split would happen in the future between the two, and when it did, it would be a pay-per-view headlining type of thing. You know, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash breaking up and splitting up in WCW should have been a really huge deal. And I remember, I think it was Slamboree, because I'm pretty sure I bought that pay-per-view as well earlier on in the year. Whatever pay-per-view it was that Scott Hall turned on Kevin Nash, I'm pretty sure it was Slamboree. And I remember when I saw it, I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked. I wasn't shocked the way I wanted to be shocked. I almost felt like they were doing it just for the sake of doing it. And I wasn't ready to see it. You know, it wasn't one of those things like, holy shit, this is going to be great. It gave me the feeling of like, oh man, I don't want to see Scott Hall and Kevin Nash broke up, at least right now, at least with what was going on. And it just really didn't appeal to me very much. Well, you fast forward all the way to October now, and they've tied in Scott's alcoholism here in the storyline. And Nash just lays down a huge beating on him for the most part of this match. Now, Scott Hall comes out first, faking being drunk. He's stumbling down to the ring. He's got a cocktail in his hand, and he doesn't look like he knows what's going on. And he actually fools Kevin Nash and gains an early advantage. Nash is kind of standing there looking at him, and Hall throws what we thought was vodka, but turned out to be water, in Nash's face and attacked him and got the upper hand early. But Nash would eventually turn the tables and just start beating the ever-loving shit out of Scott Hall for several minutes in a row. It was pretty much just a squash. And the match would end with Nash hitting Scott Hall with 2 jackknife power bombs, and then instead of just pinning him, he leaves. And I'm pretty sure Nash was the booker at this point. He allows Scott Hall to win via countout. Nash just gets out of the ring and walks away. The announcers are putting it over like, oh, he proved his point or whatever. But if I was Nash, I would have pinned his ass. So I don't even remember really liking it that much. Plus, personal demons and substance abuse storyline that they were tying in here was really uncomfortable to watch and does not age well at all. And like I said, looking back, this whole thing to me just should have been bigger. The Outsiders should have been, or the Outsiders splitting up and having a match should have been bigger than their SummerSlam 1994 match, which, ironically, is one of my favorite Intercontinental title matches in history. Don't get me wrong, I still like the Bret and Perfects and all those matches much more, but I really enjoyed the Hall and Nash match at SummerSlam, the Razor and Diesel match. I thought it was very good. And you would think that a match between the Outsiders should be bigger than that, but it wasn't. The SummerSlam match blew this one out of the water. I just didn't think it was capitalized on well. I thought it was poorly booked, written, and just wasn't very compelling, and they should have done the whole thing differently and better. They dropped the ball on this one. They dropped it hard, and that's why you could tell that the wheels were just coming off WCW, because it's one of those situations that we see WWE in now where they seemingly have a golden opportunity right there in their lap. The story is told for them, and what do? They fuck it up. And that's what WCW did here. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash was a huge disappointment. And speaking of disappointments, in another dream match on paper, we've got Bret the Hitman Hart defending the United States title against Sting. Bret Hart versus Sting. 2 years prior to this would have been a huge match. You book this match in any ring, WCW or WWE, in 1995, and we're talking about a whole different match here. But Bret, you could tell, he was in WCW for a while at this point, almost a year. He looked to me, when I look at Bret and I looked at the way he was and his demeanor and his mannerisms in WWE, compared to how he acted in WCW, you could tell that his spirit was completely broken. You can. And Bret never goes out there and doesn't give a shit at all. It's not like he's Orange Cassidy or anything, but Bret clearly was just, I just feel like he could tell that the glory days of his career is over and he's just here to make some money, and that's all it was. And much like Hall and Nash, it's a match that could have been a main event anywhere. And Bret Hart had recently turned heel earlier on in the year, which was kind of weird, and he was kind of just an outside member of the NWO, sort of, which I thought was such a weird fit for him because, during the wars between WWE and WCW, as a WWE fan, I always just had so much more respect for Bret Hart than some of the wrestlers in WCW. So to see him aligned with Hogan when you knew there was some lingering heat from the WWE days, to me, just didn't fit. I didn't like it. And as a huge Bret Hart fangirl, I was devastated around this time. I missed Bret in WWE, and he was so lost and so wasted in WCW. And this match was not even that great. I mean, it was okay. They had a couple of spots in it. They had a top rope superplex at one point, which, actually inadvertently hit the referee. The finish kind of saw Sting knock himself out. He goes to hit the Stinger splash, but he jumps too far and posts himself right on the ring post, hits his forehead there, and knocks himself out. And he's basically hung himself and draped himself over the top rope, unconscious. So the referee is out because earlier on, Sting inadvertently hit the ref from behind. He thought he was Bret Hart, gave him like a back elbow or something. So the referee's dead. So while Sting is laying there motionless, hung himself on the ropes, Bret Hart gets out of the ring, grabs Sting's baseball bat, and proceeds just to wallop Sting 3 or 4 times in the back, and then rolls his dead, potentially paralyzed body in the ring, putting him in the sharpshooter, reviving the referee who calls for the bell because Sting can't even submit if he wanted to because he's unconscious. They go full-blown neck brace, stretcher, ambulance with him. The commentators are very somber. Bret Hart's so vicious. Why did he do that and use the baseball bat and everything like that? But still, it could have been bigger, and it should have been bigger. I was devastated when Bret was heading off to WCW, but the one silver lining was that there was a couple of pieces of talent over there that I was really looking forward to seeing Bret Hart get in the ring with. And Sting was one of those guys. This match should have been huge, but this match sucked. And plus, around this time, I remember being annoyed with Sting because he joined the NWO. The motherfucker stayed silent for like 18 months, didn't say a word, hung out in the rafters, never wrestled a match, never did anything, built for a full year for his big match with Hogan. Not to mention the entire reason why he turned into the Crow gimmick in the first place was because the fans and his WCW peers thought he joined the NWO, and he was so offended by that prospect that he would turn his back on WCW, that he just completely changed who he was and underwent this 1.5 year long transformation. And here it is, 1998, less than a year after he made that transformation, and now he's in the fucking NWO. So the whole thing was just, like I said, WCW in late 98 there was really starting to go downhill hardcore. Next up is arguably the worst match in the history of professional wrestling. It's pretty ironic that this particular Halloween Havoc has, I'm going to say the word arguably because you can debate this, but I think Halloween Havoc 1998 has arguably the worst match in Halloween Havoc history and the best match in Halloween Havoc history. And not only is this next one the worst in Halloween Havoc history, it could be the worst in all of wrestling. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior, and I have to make a very painful confession. This was the match that got me to buy the pay-per-view. I just kind of wanted to see what it was going to look like. I knew that I wasn't going to get Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle. I'm not stupid. I knew exactly what I was going to get out of this match. And I also knew that these guys were not going to come anywhere close to replicating what they did at WrestleMania 6. However, to me, this match was so kind of crazy to see because I never thought we would see it again. Especially with the Warrior kind of being teased in 1995 and they brought out the Renegade instead. And now they actually have the Warrior there. He's not completely washed up yet. It's only 1998. Fans still remember him. He did get a big pop, when he showed up for the first night. And some of the build to this was really wacky and really goofy. And he was over somewhat. But again, this match, as has been the theme of this pay-per-view, on paper could have been huge. A big WrestleMania return match like this. I know people might say, oh, Warrior wasn't that relevant in 98 or whatever, but still, that is a major WrestleMania main event, one of the biggest of all time. And to be able to recreate it in WCW, I just kind of wanted to see what it was going to look like. And this match specifically is why I put my money down. I just wanted to see it. And boy, I wish I could take that back because what a pile of shit this match was. Everything looked terrible. Everything they did. Everything looked absolutely horrifically bad. When you compare it to their WrestleMania match that I think was helped put together by Pat Patterson and was really able to showcase their strengths and book the match in a way to where it wouldn't be boring as shit and they wouldn't be exposed as terrible workers and all of that. And it worked. And those guys put on a 10 times better match than I thought they would at WrestleMania 6. But damn, did they ruin that legacy. You know, and on top of that, everybody knew it. It was in the dirt sheets. It was on the hotlines. It's still talked about to this day. It's pretty much a known fact that Hogan just brought the Warrior in so he could get that fucking win back. And that's all. And I knew that Hogan was going to win this match. Even prior to this, you could smell it. I remember talking about it with people saying, you know, Hogan's probably going to get his win back from WrestleMania because you know that was eating away at him. When it was the hardest thing to sit through and watch this match again, I was dying in the seat. I'm like, this is so cringy. I felt embarrassed to be a wrestling fan, to be honest with you. Hulk Hogan would wind up taking out Nick Patrick in this match. The Giant would show up and hit Hulk Hogan with a big boot by accident, and the Warriors trying to fight off everybody, including the Giant and Vincent and Stevie Ray, who make a brief appearance. And then we get to the best part of the match. It's almost funny now. I mean, it's been 21 years. If you were born the day of the show, you can fucking drink now. So we can look back on this and laugh. But when Hogan, with what I think was supposed to be the finish, because, you know, you wouldn't plan a spot this big if, you know, it wasn't going to lead to the end. Hogan's got the flash paper, which flash paper very rarely works in professional wrestling. We've seen it botched so many times. And Hogan and Warrior, these two fools, had no business trying to do this shit at all. And Hogan is kind of crouched in the corner, and I guess the plan is for him to light the flash paper into the Warrior's face, allowing him to, I don't know, maybe roll him up or hit him with a chair or whatever, but Hogan can't get it lit, and finally when it does, it explodes in Hogan's face, and he kind of flinches, and now you've got Hogan, Warrior, and Nick Patrick. None of them know what the fuck to do. They wind up stalling a little bit until Horace comes out with Eric Bischoff. And of course, you think that Horace is going to be there to help the Warrior, but instead he hits the Warrior with a chair. And Hogan gets on top of him and gets the 1, 2, 3. So Horace, Hogan's nephew, who he just turned on and whose head he split open just a few days prior on Nitro, and he's got staples to show for it, decides that blood is truly thicker than water, and he sticks with Uncle Hulk and helps him beat the Ultimate Warrior. And oh my God, what a horrible match. If I'm going to grade this match, I'm going to give it, let's see. Let's give it negative 443,766 stars. If that wasn't enough, after the match, they actually tried to light the Ultimate Warrior on fire. I guess they've been watching Kane and The Undertaker on that really good wrestling show, Monday Night Raw, every week, and decided to douse the Ultimate Warrior with lighter fluid before security broke it up. So luckily, security saved the Ultimate Warrior from, dying. And ironically, he kind of would die after that because he would never wrestle in WCW again. I don't know how many more TV appearances he made after this. I think it was only 1 or 2 at the most. And he was gone. No Mas Warrior. And he wouldn't resurface, aside from that one match he did in like 2010, he wouldn't resurface until his induction into the Hall of Fame in 2014. And then, of course, he would pass away. So that match, they had another pretty good opportunity here, like they had with Hall and Nash and like they had with Bret and Sting, and they completely just pissed it away. And I think that even in the condition and the points in their careers they were 8 years after their WrestleMania 6 match, I still think they were capable enough to put together a passable match that would not have been that bad if maybe you didn't have egos in the way. Because even when you watch them in the ring, like, there's no chemistry there. Neither guy, I mean, they sell a little bit, but it's just real stiff and sloppy and clunky, and just something doesn't feel right about the two of them in the ring together, where at WrestleMania 6, it felt like a beautiful masterpiece. So that was just doomed from the start. And I hope that's the last time I ever have to talk about that match on this commentary channel. Now on to the main event, WCW heavyweight title on the line, champion Goldberg defending against DDP. I loved this match, and you want to know the best part about this match? Is I did not personally have the problem with the pay-per-view feed. I noticed nothing. I wasn't even aware that the pay-per-view cut off until like the next day when I was hearing it on the hotlines. So I know every pay-per-view company was different. I was living in North Carolina at this time, and this was old school. Like, I had to call ahead of time and order the pay-per-view. So it wasn't like I didn't have the shit on the interactive shit on my remote control. There was no internet back then, and you certainly couldn't order anything on your, on your cell phone or your computer or anything like that. So you had to physically call the cable company and order it ahead of time, which I did for every single WWE pay-per-view back in the day and a handful of WCW ones as well. And curiosity got me. My curiosity over the Hogan Warrior match was enough to get me to buy this pay-per-view and waste my money. So I did. And I watched the whole match. I was in my apartment by myself, one of the rare pay-per-views I watched all alone. And I remember getting to the main event and just watching it. Nothing cut off. I had no interruption, nothing. And I'm really happy I didn't, because if I would have lost the feed that night, I probably would have been freaking out. But I would probably say from the stories that I remember that the majority of the pay-per-view audience lost the feed that night. But I was one of the very few select people that had no issues whatsoever. And it's a good thing, because this was match of the night. My God, this is the best match Goldberg has ever had in his life. Diamond Dallas Page was hugely over at this point. I believe had Goldberg not burst onto the scene and came out of nowhere and took WCW by storm, it would have been DDP getting the opportunity. They would have put the belt on him, I feel. But DDP made a really good challenger for Goldberg. And given the run that Goldberg was on, I did not think DDP was going to win this match. I predicted Goldberg hands down in this thing. He had been tearing through everybody, and even though DDP was hugely over and this was going to be a really fun babyface match, I didn't see it happening. What I like the most about the match is when you watch when they start, they really look like they're fighting. They're just tearing at each other. They look like they've got this big grudge. Just these two big beefy guys being very, very aggressive. And that's the way Goldberg was anyway. His wrestling style was very aggressive and quick and fast, and he would just slam you down on the ground or throw you down before you even know what was going on. So watching the two of these guys just claw at each other and tear at each other and spill out of the ring while they're locking up was really good. And DDP, even though this match didn't go very long, I can't remember what the official time on it was. I want to say it was like 10 or 12 minutes. He pulled an excellent match out of Bill Goldberg. Goldberg's MO up until this point, even as the champion, primarily was just going out there and doing his entrance, spearing and jackhammering the guy and being back in the showers, within 2.5 minutes. But with this, he actually was taken to the limit a little bit more. He was, there was a chain wrestling sequence, which blew my mind in this. And there was a lot of fun, counters. Goldberg, to me, aged 3 years in experience by this point. He looked like somebody who was more of a 5 or 6 or 7 year veteran than someone who was a 1 year veteran. I mean, he really just looked good. And that's DDP. That's on DDP for really pulling this out of him and carrying this thing and really just putting on a fabulous match. I think my favorite spot in the match was DDP countering the jackhammer into the diamond cutter. That was great because at that point, nobody had really countered anything. Not a jackhammer, not a spear, nothing like that on Bill Goldberg. And you knew, DDP, he was doing that out of nowhere shit before Randy Orton was. One of my favorite diamond cutters is when he hit it on Scott Hall when they thought he was joining the NWO and then he turned on him. He had the NWO shirt on and everything. That got one of the biggest diamond cutter pops in DDP's history. So he hits the diamond cutter on Bill Goldberg, who kicks out. And up until that point, I don't recall, at least during this run of DDP, I don't recall anybody kicking out of that diamond cutter. Eventually, he would get DDP up in the jackhammer position and DDP would not counter. Goldberg would hit it and get the win. So he did hit the token spear and everything like that. But in the end, I don't think he even hit the spear jackhammer combo. I think he just got DDP in jackhammer position and was able to nail it and get the victory. So that was a very, very good match, and I'm so glad that I didn't lose the pay-per-view feed because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the next night on Nitro, WCW would have to give this match to the audience. I don't recall the story on if anybody got refunds or not. I'm sure something was offered, but they would have to show this match on Nitro instead, which probably didn't do them any favors for the war with Raw because everybody already knew what happened. It was kind of a spoiler, so, they're probably just going to watch Raw instead. But when you look at everything that took place on this pay-per-view, this problem, losing the pay-per-view feed, is something that should have never happened. It's a perfect example of how up their own asses WCW was. Just terrible booking and terrible planning, because it's not like now where you have the WWE Network and you can virtually do whatever you want. You only had 2 hours and 45 minutes to get these pay-per-views out. If you remember back in the day, that's how long they would go. They would end like quarter to the hour. I think they might have technically had 5 more minutes, like maybe 10 to the hour, but they didn't have the full 3 hours. It was less than that, and they had to be off the air. So you couldn't just fuck around. You couldn't just go long and then just say, oh, well, they'll just stay on the air for us, or they'll just keep the feed going. It doesn't work that way. So if somebody is sitting there, and if you're looking at all these matches, it's somebody's job to time all this shit out. How is nobody noticing that they're running long? How is nobody noticing that, hey, we are 20 minutes too long here? Think about what they could have done. That incredible, ridiculous clusterfuck with Buff and Rick and Giant and Scott and all of that nonsense. You could have easily shaved 20 minutes off of that shit. Eliminated the 15-minute stipulation at the end. Eliminate at least one of those promos. Or here's a crazy thought. Just keep the fucking match booked the way it was and the way it was advertised. Problem solved. Kick Ming and Wrath to the curb. Tell Alex Wright and Finlay to stay in catering tonight. They got the night off. Do something. There's just no excuse for it. So, luckily for me, I was none the wiser, because, like I said, I just went right on enjoying this pay-per-view and really thought that DDP and Goldberg saved the night of wrestling for me. Because, like I said, the previous 3 matches were huge letdowns. Hall and Nash, Bret and Sting, Hogan Warrior, all of them shit the bed. I thought the show opened and closed well. Goldberg and DDP, like I said, was awesome. Jericho and Raven was very good. I enjoyed Juventud and Disco Inferno. And like I said, I absolutely loved that Halloween Havoc set. And those were all the pros here, but the cons were just overwhelming. Just not good. Not good at all. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on this pay-per-view. If you are old enough to have been around and watched this thing live as it happened, let me know your memories of that, what you thought of it. And if you're watching this as a younger fan, go back and watch that Hogan and Warrior match and tell me what you think of that shit. So you guys be good. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you real soon. Peace.